Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bourbon and Bitches. Our guests in this episode are Dan Beer of the Skeptical Libertarian. Say hi, Dan. Wave. Do something. There you go. And Yvette Guinevere of Science Babe, or also known as Science Babe. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the show or tuning in for the first time, Bourbon and Bitches is a regular podcast in which the bitches, being me, Lucy Steigerwald, and Tiffany Madison, who's not currently on, we get together and chat with our guest hosts and audience and obviously drink. We talk about everything from politics to pop culture and have a habit of landing on, God knows why, sex robots. In this particular episode, we are going to focus on some rather controversial topics. The internet has already been complaining today on at least Facebook and some on Liberty Me as well about our topics. Because we're going to talk about GMOs, climate change, and vaccines, particularly the anti-vax movement. So we should probably introduce ourselves. I am Meg Gilliland. I direct social media for Voice and Exit and am really into entrepreneurship, startup culture, and disruptive technology. And tonight, I am drinking a whiskey sour. Lucy.
Oh, I'm Lucy Steigerwald. I have a humble beer and not a whiskey sour, sadly. I write things for Vice and anti-war and sometimes here. And I have myriad interests, like defending conspiracy theories awkwardly and arguing with Dan Beer about that. And I don't know enough science to be on this panel, but this will be fun.
I don't either, so this is going to be really fun.
Yes.
So I'm going to introduce our fabulous guest for this evening a little better. So Dan Beer is a recovering policy wonk from Washington, D.C. He now lives in Austin, Texas. He is the editor of the Skeptical Libertarian blog, and he's one of the admins of their very popular Facebook page. TSL's goal is to promote scientific literacy and skeptical inquiry in the libertarian movement and combat junk science and conspiracy theories. Uh-oh, Lucy. That are being spread under the banner of libertarianism. Yvette, aka Science Babe, has degrees in theater, chemistry, and forensics, and had a steady career as an analytical chemist. But then she launched her Science Babe Facebook page last fall. So that is now her full-time job. And her goal is to break down pseudoscience for the non-scientist with a touch of humor. Our first subject, GMOs. So genetically modified foods tend to really rile up those on both sides of the debate.
I'm going to take a really long
you guys are all
sip of my
hearing
drink
this echo.
before this.
We don't know what's causing the echo. We have no idea. We all have on headphones. It's just echoing from one of these.
I still understand you, Meg. Like, I think it's not that bad. I think they're just bitching.
Okay. So, dear audience, can you tell us, is this like so annoying that you can't enjoy the show? Answer in chat. It's the only place you can answer. Annoying but workful. All right, we're gonna go with it.
I like it.
Okay, so these are Tiffany's. These are Tiffany's questions. I'm stealing her questions, so she had questions written for you guys. So she said the two of you rustle some jimmies when addressing the safety and viability of genetically modified food. So, Dan, can you explain what you consider to be a GMO exactly? And what are two common misconceptions that inspire resentment towards GMOs?
Oh, well, I could go for the full, hour on this topic, so just cut me off.
Okay, well, I mean, what you gotta do.
Well, what a GMO is all organisms are genetically, the echo is killing me. All organisms are genetically modified. Particularly all agriculture has been modified from its natural form so that people can actually eat it. So we can grow it and we can produce vast quantities of it, enough to feed, billions of people. What we mean by a GMO is recombinant DNA modification, which is where you go in and you actually tinker with the DNA directly. So rather than just, blasting it with radiation and hoping to get a lucky mutation, or just doing crossbreeding, you can actually target specific genes that have known effects and try to modify them or add them to organisms. There's lots of different reasons why people are worried about this. One that drives me absolutely insane is the idea that the DNA from it's the you are what you eat idea. The idea that DNA from foods you eat actually gets incorporated into your own DNA and then you turn into Hulk or something. I'm not really sure. And beyond that, there's just people have a general angst about different things, especially things that they put into their own body. So, liberals have always, particularly liberals, have always had this worry about non-organic food, mass-produced food, processed food, put an adjective in front of food and they're worried about it. And so the idea is, our bodies are the sacred natural thing and we should only put the purest, finest stuff into it. And that means whatever is most natural. And the fetish about natural food is probably the second biggest annoyance to me. It's the idea that whatever comes from nature is actually, healthy and good for you, whereas nature is trying to kill you almost all the time. So I think those are my two biggest problems. One of them is just funny, but it's kind of a widespread misconception. And the other one really goes to the root of, I think, a lot of people's paranoia about GMOs.
Anything to add to that, Miss Science Babe?
Oh, quite a few. But again, like you said, I could go on for an hour. I wrote actually a blog on it as an open letter to Bill Nye because he's anti-GMO, but he also is is an engineer who hasn't been working in a lab for a long time, and his point of view on it was we just can't know. That's a very unscientific point of view. That's kind of a religious point of view of we just can't know. Well, we can test for things, so of course we can know. So here's the thing about GMOs. In order to get a genetically modified organism into the food supply, it has to be proven to be nutritionally indistinguishable from the original organism. It has to have the same nutrient content, has to have the same basic caloric content. It has to be to the consumer. You can't be able to look at it, smell it, sniff it, whatever, and be able to tell, oh, this is the genetically modified version of the original one. The reasons that we modify them, a lot of time, this go back to Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution, looking at the crops and seeing why are these crops dying, why aren't they surviving, in the wild. A lot of them we can look at the at wheat strains and see they were being attacked by funguses such as rust, the Hawaiian papaya plant, and see they weren't surviving from the Hawaiian papaya ring spot virus. Basically, we were giving them the plant versions of vaccines into their DNA. So, I mean, that's one type of thing we were doing. Sometimes we were crossbreeding somewhat at the molecular level to make them hardier strains of crops. So these were things we were doing, and when we did that, we had to make sure that these were not unsafe, both for the consumer and for the environment. We have done study after study, and at this point, there are over 1,000 studies showing they're safe both for people and for the environment. I mean, I know a lot of times you'll hear people say, I was skeptical at first, but I really was too. I mean, they sounded scary. Everywhere you look online, there are people saying GMOs are unsafe. And before I really looked at this with a skeptical eye, I wasn't sure. But now I've looked at the data. There hasn't been a single reputable study showing that these are anything but safe. The data is just not there. So they're safe. They have to be proven safe before they're put into the environment. They're fine for humans, and actually they put less. One of the other arguments I can't stand is that they're just there so that Monsanto can put more of their pesticide into the environment. They actually use less pesticide acre per acre than their conventionally grown or organic grown counterparts. They're non-GMO counterparts. So that's that. Good for the environment, good for people.
Lucy,
one thing
do you
I'd
have
like
anything
to
to
add
add?
to that is One thing I'd like to add to that is some of the angst might come from the idea that we're vaccinating our food, and that's where GMOs come from. But I suppose we'll get to anti-vaccine people later.
No,
Um,
that's a
but
good
yeah,
point.
just
But it's saved actually the Hawaiian papaya market. If you look into the Hawaiian papaya market, don't say Hawaiian papaya too many times. It'll feel like you're chewing bubble gum. But if you look into that, it really did save the market. It was dying, and they found a way to genetically modify it to be resistant. Like I said, it basically gave it a vaccine, and now it's a blooming market. So it's wonderful what they were able to do there. But they do it a lot of times to be resistant to the type of viruses and funguses that can attack crops. We don't, and I mean, I have to put this proviso out. Yes, I did work at a pesticide company, not Monsanto. I've never worked at a company that produced genetically modified organisms. Now I only work at Science Babe full time. I work for myself. So my opinion is not being bought off. But this is so I've seen what it takes to put a pesticide onto the market. I've seen what it takes to put a GMO onto the market from friends that work at other companies that we've worked with. It is incredibly difficult, and you have to go through a huge approval process. So there's that.
yeah,
So if anyone has any
one of the
questions
other
about that, who's listening in, feel free to throw them our way, I guess.
Yeah, one of the other huge misconceptions is the idea that GMOs are not regulated, and that nobody's done any testing, and we're just pumping them out there. You know, the Monsanto Protection Act. But I mean, the reality is that during the 1990s, it took an average of about 6 months to approve 50 different biotech applications at the USDA, and from 2000 to 2007. It took 3 times as long to approve half as many biotech crop applications. And, in the last 5 years, it took nearly 5 times as long as it did in the 1990s to approve half as many applications for biotechnology to be put out into the market. It's incredibly expensive, and it takes a really long time. And the reason is that the government would, all their incentives are to be too strict with regulation.
Yes.
They're not just in bed with big pharma or the seed companies. All their incentives are they're not going to get called to Congress for delaying the application of a safe food. But if they put something out that has some maybe tiny effect on human health, they are going to be just crucified in the public square.
They'll be nailed to
which
the
is
wall.
why. And
I mean, I worked as an analytical chemist at a pesticide company. My job was to be too fucking careful. There's no other way to phrase that. I mean, if I screwed up one lab test, if I didn't record one thing or just recorded one chemical wrong, I mean, and rightfully so, I would have lost my career. And I mean, there were times when I would spend 2 weeks trying to troubleshoot why the relative standard deviation on one of my instruments wasn't below 2%. Because I normally would have it at between 0.5 and 0.3%. So troubleshooting machines alone, and I was one cog in the system. I would spend, like I said, just 2 weeks troubleshooting things at times. So I mean, if I was at that level of care and concern, think about what everyone else in the system was doing. Of course, I'm probably just part of the conspiracy.
Yeah,
right.
definitely.
I'm not being paid off, but I'm not closing the door on that. So if Monsanto is listening.
Here's the thing. Now, because I've said I don't work for Monsanto, or because I've said I have not accepted money for them, and because I'm friends with a few of the guys from Monsanto on Twitter now, I'm sitting here going, God, I can't go to consult for them. I've shut the door on that accidentally. So
but I have not. So.
Oh no, the guys from there are great though. I mean, they do a ton of really good research that's fed a lot of people. So
yeah, no,
but I mean,
one of the things that will rustle more jimmies than anything else is my observation that Monsanto really isn't any worse than any other large corporation. I mean, sure, they do things that I wouldn't have done, but and I'm not just saying this because they reposted one of my blogs on their company website one time. Although that was that ruined my credibility forever.
They are actually smaller. Here's something I always bring up to people, though, whenever people try to demonize them. I think they brought in something like 14 some odd billion dollars in fiscal year 2013, and Whole Foods brought in about $12 billion. Don't tell me that one of these companies is the most evil corporation on the planet, when one of them is trying to make the technology that is feeding starving people, and the other one sells $4 bottled water to rich people.
But I mean, Whole
No,
Foods is run by a libertarian, so they're okay to libertarians too, or something. I don't know.
or something. I mean, here's the thing: no company's perfect. You know, it's there. Everyone's like, no company's perfect, but here's the thing: every company is run by people. Every company is putting something, and I mean, especially Monsanto, or I mean, any company's putting something into the food supply. They know that they're going to eat it. Their children are going to eat it. They are going to be putting every effort into it to make it safe. I mean, that's the thing. I don't eat organic, and I was a pesticide chemist.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's just because you
So
need the
for
antidote
those,
or something. Yeah, I mean, one one thing that really bothers me is just the assumption that like there's just thousands of doctors and scientists and researchers and employees of these companies, DuPont and Syngenta and Monsanto and uh, you know, hundreds of companies and tens of thousands of employees who are just totally fine with like the mass genocide of the human race. I mean, that's really what you have to assume, is that
they
they're
all
all in on it and they don't care if their own children and family are killed. And they're doing this
and
for
those
what? For
doctors,
money?
statistically, those doctors have family members who got cancer too, and they're covering up all these cancer cares too, and they're covering up everything they did that was horrible for the human race too. Absolutely. Come
Yeah,
on.
of course.
But I mean, it's if you have to buy into that, you're buying into a lot more than just this stuff is safe. I don't know. At some point, you have to say reality is just as you see it. So I mean, sometimes there's going to be a little bit of spin in the media. I've seen it with my own campaigns when they've hit the media, but at the same time, somewhere along the way, this stuff just kind of is as we see it, and the GMOs are safe. The preponderance of research is there, so that's it is as we see it.
Yeah,
So.
and one more point on Monsanto. I promise I'll stop shilling for them eventually.
Oh, it's okay.
The
It's okay. I'm sure you're
the
getting your shill
story,
bucks right now.
it's in the mail. They promised me. They
You
promised
know
me
what?
it was in the mail.
I'm
So
still driving a 2009 Corolla with 200,000 miles on it. My shillbucks, I am waiting. So
it's a
carry on
coupon for
waiting
a
for
free
you.
oil change. But you're going to be
Oh,
really disappointed, just so you know.
oh.
Uh,
hmm.
but the story that Monsanto sues companies that accidentally get cross-contaminated with their seeds. I just want to say, if anyone has heard this story, and I don't think there's anybody who's interested in this topic who has not heard this story, it's complete
Yep.
bullshit. Spend like
Yep.
5 minutes on Google. There's one case in
Really?
Canada where a guy
It's
pretty much
complete shit.
deliberately did it,
Uh-huh.
and they settled the case. And that's the only case of
Wait,
anything
wait,
even
wait.
remotely like this.
What do you mean
Complete
deliberately did it?
shit.
Explain.
Oh, okay. So
Explain
what
this to
the story is that farmers, that Monsanto seeds got like blown into their fields or something,
right,
and like
And farmers,
contaminated their special organic crops or something, and then
and
Monsanto sued them
Monsanto sued them.
right.
but it's not true. So what the case was, I mean, you can just look it up, but what the case was that they found that this person was growing, something like 40% of their food was their specially patented genetically modified seed or whatever, and then they sued them for growing it without paying for a license. Now, whatever you think of intellectual property, blah blah blah,
Yeah,
that's a
that's
different show.
Like,
But
you can
bullshit.
argue that,
That's
yeah, you can argue that all day long, but
yeah, but
it's
they did not sue them for accidentally getting some of their seeds in
right,
their
sprinkling
field or
5
something like that.
seeds.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
yeah.
if you want to, you
It's
want to make a
never
documentary that
happened.
sounds really, yeah. You want to make a
It's never
documentary that sounds really good, make it sound like Big Evil Monsanto sent 5, black SUVs in the middle of the night to your house for 5 seeds in your yard. Makes
yeah,
much better
Good
and
to know that.
television.
yeah. So it's never happened. It could never happen. There's not a judge in the world who would keep a case in court,
Hmm.
on that basis. So it's I think just the lack of the lack of just plain skepticism. Like, go on Snopes, for God's sake. It's the easiest thing in the world. Just if you hear something that
Snopes is a
sounds
beautiful thing.
unbelievable, if you hear something that sounds unbelievable, don't believe it until you at least check it out.
Daniel, you're just shilling for Monsatan now.
Ooh, Monsatan, I
Obviously.
like that. That's new.
Yeah,
Monsatan.
it's good. It's like treason or stato. I'm adding that to my.
You've
Hey
been,
guys,
you've been
my
drinking
resume.
more of that
You
Hitler
guys
water
can
that
hear
Bonnie
me?
Hari talks about.
Can you hear me now?
More like
Yes.
statism and bitches.
Oh.
More like bourbon and statism. I don't know. We'll get a critique of this show going soon.
This is where people tell me that I'm, I don't know, that I've been eating too many of the GMOs, and of course my brain is racked with vaccines for papayas.
Don't forget the
Probably,
fluoride.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, of course the fluoride. That causes the
You guys,
autism.
this is like a tangent, but since you keep making jokes about how shilly you are, I want to kind of hear about as a side, less scientific topic, so I can actually say something about it. But I know Dan gets a bunch of shit from his fellow libertarians incessantly, scores of times a day for liking science so much. Is that the same for you? And can you guys? I don't know. I want to hear more about like. Do you get more shit from libertarians for what you do? Like for being sellouts, for demanding credibility, and like what are libertarians' problem? What is their problem with this? With
liking
their
science?
objection to with
Oh,
objecting to skepticism, things like that.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we talked about this on your podcast, which is excellent. Everyone should totally check it out. Lucy, this is your cue to.
Once yes, once it's whenever the hell it happens. So tune
Yes.
in whenever that is.
Yeah, exactly. Just follow Lucy. Well, I think part of the problem is that people think that anything that is, libertarians tend to be just sort of a hodgepodge of people who don't, make a habit out of not trusting the establishment, whatever that means to them. So when they see, big corporations or, big government and they're all involved with something, like they really love to question the official story, even if there isn't an official story. It's sort of the one step to big government test, which is that if you can connect GMOs to something like the FDA, well, the FDA is bad, so because it's part of the big government. So whatever the FDA says is okay, you can't trust them because they're the government. And
Right.
I'm all for not blindly trusting the government, but I'm not asking people to trust the government. I'm not asking people to just put your faith in Barack Obama and just, pledge allegiance to the Food and Drug Administration. I'm asking them to look at the evidence. Look at thousands of different, separate, independently conducted studies from independent researchers who are all finding the same conclusions. And then to still believe that this is all some sort of government conspiracy at that point, it just strains credibility to the point where if you still believe that, there's probably nothing I can say that's going to change your mind because you'll just assume that I'm part of the conspiracy.
Yep.
So I think that's part of it. I don't know, and if I knew exactly what was causing it, I could go and like root it out, but I'm still working on it.
I was gonna say that Brandon in the chat says libertarians have trouble with science issues because of the policy recommendations that stem from the science. Example, climate change. And I was actually going to wonder about that because, and I was going to ask about that because there is this element of mostly liberalism where they kind of have this idea that it's the chart type of liberalism. Well, we can prove this, so with science we can sort of perfect government and
Sure.
and do something that will lead definitely to this result. And I think there probably is a fear of that as well.
Sure. The scientistic idea that we're going to be run by a group of technocratic elites who are going to plan society for us and tell us all and don't let us choose. And that's the big fear is the lack of the idea
That's
that
a realer
government's
fear,
going to take
I
away.
think.
Yeah, that's the idea that government's going to take away our choice. But I don't agree. I think that there's so many scientific, what you would call scientific issues where the science points against more government intervention.
Oh,
and GMOs
did
are
we
perfect
get
examples.
a frozen
it takes
Dan
an
Bear?
average of one, it takes an Uh, am I good?
Suddenly heard Tiffany there. That was very confusing. Tiffany,
Uh,
you live?
so
Hello?
there's so many issues where the scientific evidence points against government intervention, and GMOs is a perfect example. So is pharmaceuticals, where it takes 10 years to get a new biotech crop approved because the regulation is strangling it. Um, and vaccines is another example where I don't think that the scientific evidence really points towards what the anti what towards more government intervention. I think, in contrast, it points against it. Um, and there's lots of examples, especially with food. So people have paranoia about processed food. Michael Bloomberg is the standard bearer for unscientific public policy. His experiments in New York City with we're going to ban big gulps, but Trenta Frappuccinos at Starbucks are just perfectly okay because that's what rich people drink. I mean, it's perfectly clear that a better understanding of science would point against the nanny state intervention, I think.
Well, if I may, there was also I think it was from Jonathan Rauch. There was a book called The Kindly Inquisitors, where he had a very I think a kind of poetic point even. Everything that we want to do that someone might want to do with government intervention, we're already doing anyway. Um, we want to force government to do things with solar panels. People are doing that anyway. People are going to make pushes with the Tesla. People are making pushes with certain types of, people are making pushes for things that are better for us, that are healthier for us, that are going to make us more energy independent because it's better for us economically. I don't think we have to always use government force to get things done. I think we're going to say this is more cost efficient, this is better for us for sustainability, and we're going to see it's going to get done through science without government force.
In the
Yeah, that
So I think
chat,
sounds
technology can
in the
lead.
chat,
I think technology can lead the way without being forced through, as Pendula would say, without using a gun to take your tax dollars from you to have it happen.
damn
sure, and
right.
I mean, and we don't need. I mean, scientific progress is not primarily being driven by big government, state institutions that are pushing things forward. Now, in the contrast, we have government regulatory agencies whose primary responsibility is to hold back innovation. Now, maybe we think that we need an FDA because we don't want just any untested or privately tested pharmaceutical being pushed out onto the market. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to. I don't really want to argue about that right now in this show, but you know, their primary responsibility is actually to keep us away from the cutting edge of science. There's a 10-year lag typically between when a pharmaceutical compound is developed and when it's actually able to be marketed. And it's a similar lag for biotech crops. So I think
Do you know
government's
why?
primary responsibility is to hold back scientific progress because we're afraid of the impact of unregulated progress on humankind. Now, I'm not going to defend that, but it doesn't lend support to the narrative that scientific progress is this thing that's a danger to us and is being pushed on us by the government.
Do you know why it takes 10 years sometimes to get a new drug to market, though? Like how long phase 3 trials take, how long all these different trials take?
Yes,
I
I'm
mean,
saying there's a perfectly good reason for that, and we can argue about whether they should
representing it as
streamline the
just they're
process for
holding
drugs.
it back is, I think, a little simplistic.
Okay, all right,
But I
that
mean,
might be all
it's
right.
you're not
That
allowing
might
an
be
option for people to take a risk
right.
and be told risks with a drug that hasn't been tested for 15 years. And generally, libertarians object to not letting people take a risk if they're informed about, maybe you'll have 3 arms tomorrow because of this drug, but maybe your cancer will be gone. Giving people that
Right. I
option
mean,
a little
maybe
faster.
there's a perfectly good reason for, the length of time it takes to get from the laboratory to the pharmacy. I'm not saying that there's not. That would be a blanket statement. And in a free market, I seriously doubt that there would just be a bunch of mad scientists, handing out pills to people on the street that I just whipped up 5 minutes ago.
I mean,
What my point here is that what the government's responsibility, as it sees it, is to take, things that, take scientific innovation and test it and test it and test it and test it. Their primary responsibility is to make sure it's safe before people are able to buy it, not to just, whip up any crazy new thing that can make, Merck or Monsanto a ton of money and push it out onto the market. I mean, that's not their responsibility, and that's not actually what they're doing. I mean, that's my point.
fair enough. Can you guys actually hear me now? Maybe? Anyone? Little bit? Okay. Okay,
I can
good.
hear
Sorry
you.
about that. I'm visiting family, and although I love my great state of Texas, apparently their Wi-Fi is total shit. So I apologize for the constant delay, and I didn't get in to come in and stir as much shit as I wanted to, unfortunately. But I have actually a question for you guys why I have a momentary solid connection. So anti-vaccines, I actually live in Tennessee now, but even in Texas, there's this huge movement, especially among young, yuppie housewives, to not vaccinate their children. And libertarians, many of them, are right in line with this. And, recent reports indicate that nearly eradicated diseases have popped up in schools. Recently, there was, a measles outbreak, which the media chose to highlight as a reflection of the anti-vaccine movement. And many of the women that I think kind of go along with this, not exclusively, but just the chicks that I deal with and have these discussions with, they resist vaccines, and their primary argument is because they don't trust, it's not because they don't trust the science of vaccines, they do not trust the state's insistence on vaccines that they do not see as necessary. Do you think that the cozy relationship between big pharma and state governments, like in Texas, where Rick Perry forced children to get HPV vaccines, or the cozy relationship between big pharma and the federal government, contribute to this fear that a ton of really unsafe, untested, not truly vetted vaccines are being forcibly distributed to children, essentially, and that this kind of buttresses this hysteria? And second question for both of you, since I know we're running out of a little bit of time, so we may not get to climate change tonight, because I know this will probably rile you guys up, but another thing is this
was a very long
very,
first
very
question.
strong link that many people argue between autism and the rise of autism, and whether it's, actually vaccines that could contribute to this, or, and maybe we just haven't studied it enough, or is it that we're classifying autism completely differently now than we were a decade ago, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades ago? So, what do you guys think, if there's any credibility at all to arguments from the anti-vaccine crowd related to big pharma and government's cozy relationship?
Can I grab the
And the
second question first?
has to do with that very, very interesting
All right, well, first of all,
presupposed link between the rise in alleged autism cases and vaccines. What do you guys think about both of those two big predominant issues in the anti-vaccine community?
I'm just going to grab that one first. There has been, and I mean, this is, I know I'm going to be called that I'm a shill, that I'm part of the conspiracy, but we're going to go for this. There is no rise in cases of autism. Bang. But here's, good night, ladies and gentlemen. No. But here's what happened. Once upon a time, in order to be classified as autistic, you had to be nonverbal and deeply withdrawn. Now, think back to your classroom. I mean, I'm 31. I don't know how old everyone is in this conversation, but most of my followers are between 25 and 34 years old. Think back to your classroom when you were, in elementary school. How many kids were diagnosed as autistic? I don't remember a single one of my class being diagnosed as autistic. How many kids, according to today's definition of autism, would be diagnosed as autistic? Now we have the autism spectrum, where we're including kids who have Asperger's, we're including kids who are on the autism spectrum. We have a lot more kids who are included in the diagnosis, and a lot more doctors are aware that we have a bigger spectrum of diagnoses. Also, parents are more likely to ask, is my child autistic, in order to get special help they need so that they're more able to succeed in life. So we have a higher rate of diagnoses due to higher awareness and due to a change of diagnoses. No more children today have the symptoms that lead to the diagnosis of autism or autism spectral disorder than did 100 years ago. It is a change in diagnoses and a change in awareness. Go ahead and quote me on it. You have no more children that are deeply that have classical autism that are deeply withdrawn and nonverbal. You have a much higher preponderance of children that are being diagnosed as on the spectrum, and it's because we've changed the definition. That's all. Change the diagnosis, of course, or change the classification or the symptoms you need for diagnosis, and of course, the number of children that are going to be diagnosed goes up. I know I'm rambling now, so I'm cutting myself off.
Is it simply? I mean, this is all totally anecdotal, but there are all these parents who claim things like, my kids seemed like they had normal development, and they got their vaccines at 2, and then something went really wrong. I mean,
great question.
Well, it's just in their heads.
No, it's a great question. It's because that's around, think about it this way. How old are kids when they start talking? How old are kids when they have autism, when they start saying rhombus, parallelogram? A lot of times, one of the symptoms of autism is that they're very good at things like pointing out shapes and colors, and it's around that age that, number one, they get their shots, and number two, they start having these symptoms. So, I mean, here's the other thing. We see children without their vaccines who have autism. And I believe it's Finland where they've kept very, very good records and I saw this a few years ago, so I don't know if I'd be able to pull it up again, but they kept very, very good records of children who were and were not vaccinated, and they saw the exact same rate of autistic kids within the vaccinated and non-vaccinated communities. So, children are getting autism whether they are or are not vaccinated. So please vaccinate so that your child won't get the measles. And, if your child is going to get vaccinated, if your child is going to get autism, it really doesn't matter whether or not they're vaccinated. Please don't let them get the measles too. We have ways to help them have a very successful life now. If they have autism. That's not a death sentence. Polio can be, and polio hasn't been eradicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I think that was a very cogent response to the autism vaccine link. The other thing I would point out is that the concern that vaccines cause autism it is just a story of ad hoc hypotheses being tacked on. So every time they'll say, like, what is it about vaccines that causes autism? They start with the assumption that vaccines cause autism, and then they find something in the vaccine, that is alleged to have caused autism. It was thimerosal until based on pure fear mongering, it was removed. There was no evidence that thimerosal actually caused autism or brain damage or anything of the kind. But merely to appease public concerns, it was pulled from almost all vaccines, almost all childhood vaccines, especially, simply to allay public concerns about this. Now, this did exactly the opposite because they said there's nothing wrong with it, but we're taking it out anyway. So all this did was create more confusion about it. But it's been removed from as a preservative from a number of vaccines at a number of different countries at a number of different times. And the autism diagnosis rate hasn't changed at all. The trajectory didn't change.
It's gone up slightly, but that's because we're getting better at diagnosing it. I just want to make sure that we're getting back straight. So it's just it's just we're still getting better at diagnosing. But continue.
Right. The trajectory of increased diagnoses of autism didn't change in Finland or in Britain or in the United States before and after any of these removals of thimerosal. So then they came up with another hypothesis and then another hypothesis because they really want vaccines to be responsible for. Yes, aluminum was one. And then just after study came out that showed delaying vaccination does not delay the onset of autism. Not vaccinating does not have any statistically significant impact on the likelihood of your child being diagnosed for autism. And so every time that this story keeps coming up, I just think that, like, how many more studies do we need? I mean,
They're gonna
is
say
it
it's the
just
water that's in it.
right? Is it just a coincidence that, like, every time we cater to a public concern about this, this story keeps, perpetuating itself based on one flawed and deeply dishonest study in
And
Britain,
discredited.
and widely
Oh yeah.
and retracted
Mhm.
and was stripped of his medical license for being an unethical hack. Uh,
Yeah.
it's infuriating, and it does a huge disservice to people who actually have autism, because the people who tell you that vaccines cause autism, just you wait. They will try to sell you some magic cure for it, a hyperbaric chamber or detoxing
Bleach
pads.
enemas. The
Bleach.
bleach
Oh
enemas
God.
horrify me because children have been horribly maimed by this because their parents would rather give their child an enema of bleach to try to cure their imperfect to them child. Rather than say my child has autism, let's try to find a therapy, an educational therapy to help them, give them the skills, the coping skills they need for life. They'd rather give them a bleach enema from a snake oil salesman. This is
Isn't that
horrifying to
just
me.
felonious child abuse? I mean, that's
Yeah,
not anything
exactly.
except
It
child
it
abuse.
That
it
is
ought
what it
it ought
is.
to it ought to be, but just you wait. Every time the comments in those stories are even more horrifying than the story itself,
They
because you will
say,
always see hundreds of people saying that's the parent's right to choose. We have no business criticizing them for giving their child a bleach enema.
and some of
And
the
Isn't
parents
that
they'll say, oh, my child was they'll say that there are worms in their child that the bleach enema was helping clear out, and their child was screaming because the worms were leaving their child's system, and it was helping their child become unautistic. I wish I had
that's
not read this.
disturbing on like
I'm
7 different
sorry.
levels.
Here's the thing, and I mean, I hope that I wish I had never read any of this, but at the same time, this is why at some point I hope this whole vaccine autism debate at some point goes away because we do have, like I said, educational therapies being used to help people who have autism, as opposed to saying it's the vaccines and keep looking for some sort of thing in the vaccines that we're saying is causing the autism. Because you know what, the parents of the autistic children deserve better. I have members on my site who have varying degrees of autism who are wonderful members of the site. I have friends with autism. They're wonderful. I mean, instead of saying I don't want my child to have autism, so I'm not going to vaccinate, say I want to vaccinate my child. And you know what? The vaccines don't cause it autism. They don't. Let's not do a disservice to the people who have autism, and let's not do a disservice to my child by denying them the vaccines. And you know what? There are people who are researching the actual cause of autism. It seems to be genetic. It seems to be in certain. I believe it was the shorter length chromosomes that are formed in certain whatchamacallit, in a certain point of whatchamacallit, of DNA synthesis while they're
meiosis.
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. Sorry, what?
Meiosis.
Your help either. Yes, that's. It's like I was reading up on this while I was early on while I was fighting one of these things. But you know what? It is not the damn vaccines. But it's like they're
Yeah.
finding therapies for this. They're finding therapies for this that are not related to the vaccines whatsoever. And it's like if we could just get away from the whole vaccine thing,
And
this could help out the people that are actually suffering from this or working with this a lot more.
Yeah, and I think we actually have made progress on the anti-vaccine front. There's been a number of studies recently that show that anti-vaccine opinions are actually on the decline in the United States, and I think
That's
that's
good.
I mean, it's not where I'd like it to be, but I think the impact. When people may say a pollster, well, I heard that vaccines cause autism, but I think most parents, when the rubber meets the road, they will go and listen to their doctor and find someone who knows what they're talking about and who they trust, who will say, I understand your concerns, but this is what the evidence shows, and you really be doing your child a disservice by doing this. And I think most parents out there will listen to that, even if they have heard, my uncle got autism after he was vaccinated, or some anecdotal story like that. I do want to answer Tiffany's point about mandatory vaccine laws, and
Yeah, go ahead.
there's a couple of different responses to this from a libertarian perspective, and one is that if you go and cough on someone and give them a deadly disease because of your idiotic choice to not be vaccinated, uh, I think that's a pretty compelling violation of their right not to get horribly sick, merely because you wanted to exercise your right. So you have actually done them a severe harm in doing that. And the other thing is that there really aren't that many mandatory vaccine laws. I mean, there's no vaccine police that's going to kick in your door if you're not vaccinated and stab you full of needles. The main laws that impact vaccination rates are mandatory vaccines in order to enroll your child in school. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing. If you had a private daycare center, you wouldn't want an unvaccinated child infecting a lot of your clients, or if you run a private school for that matter. And as long as the government is responsible for the safety of our public schools, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, if you want to bring your child to our school, they have to be vaccinated, because we do not want an outbreak of measles or mumps or whooping cough in our school. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. And the only thing that's statist about that is the fact we have public schools, not the fact that we require people to get vaccinated in order to go to them.
That reminded me, they did find once, and please don't take me out of context on this, whoever's listening who might be anti-vax, they found once a slightly higher rate of vaccinations amongst some special needs children, some of whom did have autism. The reason was because they went to a special needs school, and the school, as opposed to the public school, the private school that was special needs required vaccines because of the preponderance of children with special needs. So that was the only reason why they had a slightly higher rate of vaccination. We see, again, correlation does not necessarily equal causation. So that was why they had a slightly higher rate. I guess my feeling on the necessity of vaccination, I'm not sure if I would go as high as mandating them, partially because I'm not sure, anytime you enact legislation, you come to the point where there are people who need to not have vaccines mandated for them. People who have who have compromised immune systems, people who have had legitimate vaccine reactions. There are people who have certain types of seizure disorders. I mean, there was this wonderful PBS special that did take a pro-vaccine stance and showed people who, anytime they have certain types of, anytime people have fevers, it'll trigger a seizure, and they need to not have vaccines. There are certain types of, like I said, immune issues that they can't have vaccines. What type of hoops would they have to jump through to not get their vaccine? So I'm not sure if I want to mandate them, but like you said, if private institutions want to mandate, you have to, in order to have this job, in order to send your child here, I think they should be absolutely allowed to say, yes, if you're working at a hospital, if you're around 6 people, get every vaccine on the planet. One of the labs that I've worked at, I worked in a toxicology testing lab. We were dealing with bodily fluids every day. They said, by the way, we're not just working with this type of bodily fluid, we're adding another one to the list. You're all going out and getting your Hep B vaccine. I'm like, sold. Whenever I hear a nurse saying they don't want to get their flu shot, I'm like, are you kidding? When I go to a hospital now, I ask my nurses, have you had your flu shot? If they say they haven't, I'm like, get out of my room. I want a nurse who believes in medicine. I have the right to fire my nurses, okay? But I mean, that's the thing. Private institutions have the right to set their own rules. I don't know if I would go as far as to set them, just because I don't know what hoops the people who are immunocompromised would have to go through because of the mandate. But the next question is, I like to say, your right to swing your fist ends at my face. Is, like you said, coughing on someone and giving them that disease, is that in essence, swinging your biological fist at your disease at my face?
Yeah.
That's
Well,
I
you're
guess the next
practically.
question there.
I'd hate to tell you that, but you're practically a libertarian with that principle. So,
Well, no, I
uh,
am. I'm a registered
Yeah, you
libertarian.
are.
I
I'm pretty sure you are at this point.
Well, no,
That's
I
great.
am a registered libertarian. I think people
Good.
expect me to be liberal because I'm a scientist. I'm a registered libertarian who tends to vote liberal, kind of because I think there was a perfect quote from the guys in South Park. It was, I hate Republicans, but I fucking hate liberals.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's,
And
here's the thing,
if
it's
I
like
can,
I think I just hate politics.
yeah,
So it's
There
Do
you
you
go.
do you guys want to take some
that's the
questions? We
primary.
actually have a few, and one of them
Oh,
is
sure.
pretty
Can I?
good. I'm
Can I?
interested in your take as long as I'm not lagging too much. I'm gonna put it on the screen. This is from Scott, who is awesome. He's a scientist by trade. I just threw it up on the screen. He asks, "What's the general take on public funding of science? I'm very fiscally libertarian. I think the private sector does it more efficiently when a profit motive is at play. But I think you need basic research where failure and risk are more acceptable, which creates a better environment for young scientists." And then he goes on to say actually many things that lack, and then it cut him off. But the first basis is a good question. I mean, what do you think about the general take on public funding of science?
Well, I can say. Sorry, you can go ahead.
Well, I think there can be good to both. Here's the thing: I was on a panel this weekend with a guy who used to work with at NASA, and of course he was. And I mean, I realized I was the only libertarian on the panel. When I was like, I made the point that a bunch of them seemed to be very anti-capitalism, and I'm like, iPhone. This is a result of capitalism. What do you guys mean you're anti-capitalism? It's wonderful. They're arguing against it. I'm like, I forget if it was 1 million or if it was 100,000, but someone said, I will give you $1 million prize if somebody can make a tricorder. Bang! Within 6 months, someone made a freaking tricorder. It was incredible. So I was very in support of that. But I know it's a little tangenty. In terms of public funding for science, I think we do need some things that can say science is for everyone. Because we're gonna have it's somewhere there was I think it's probably from Neil deGrasse Tyson, somewhere locked in the minds of a very poor child, somewhere there is going to be there's going to be the next cure for cancer. There's going to be the next innovation that doesn't have the capability to get the funding, to get the knowledge into it without public knowledge available. So, I mean, I think having some amount of public funding for science, having some amount of public funding for science, both, in business and, in education, I think it's not a bad thing. But I think having most of it in industry is probably better. Just as someone who's worked mainly as an industry scientist, I've had one government job as an explosives chemist for Homeland Security. I can't talk about it too much, but at the same time, it's like I think I saw things move a little bit faster when I worked in private industry. I think in general, even though, yeah, it's like there is going to be a profit motive at play, but at the same time, everything's going to be regulated. We've worked through enough from, back in the day when it was like, hey, anything goes. We're, throwing lead at the wall and seeing what sticks, which is obviously really dangerous. We kind of know the dangers of what we're working with. We're making sure that things that are going to people is safe now. It's like as you were saying, as the question goes, with let's see, failure and risk is more acceptable. I mean, here's the thing: we understand the risks of what we're playing with in science now. There is enough government oversight, just with laws and whatnot, that even with most of science being funded privately, people are going to eventually get the benefit of it. So I think it's fine to do most of science publicly. I still think having NASA,
Yeah.
or sorry, privately. I think having NASA as a publicly funded thing, because it takes up very little of our tax money and as a force of nature is still a wonderful thing. So that's
Yeah,
kind of my
and
take on it.
yeah, and as far as NASA goes, I'm much happier to have the government shooting rockets into space than into people. So if that's really
Yes. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so,
That was a
I'm
beautiful
not.
point.
I'm gonna embroider that on a
NASA also-
sampler or something.
I think NASA also takes up much less money than people realize.
Yeah, and it's a
Yeah.
lot of money, but relative to what we're spending on killing people, it's almost nothing. So
Yeah.
it's
More
certainly not
NASA rockets.
it's not at the top of my hit list of government agencies.
Yeah.
As far as the public funding of science goes, again, that's also a pretty tiny percentage of not only of government spending, but of total funding of science. I mean, most research and development is funded by private industry. I mean, the overwhelming majority is funded by private industry. So when we talk about public versus private funding of science, I mean, I just consider it sort of a side issue whether we should have public funding of science because, I mean, the government does give grants and does, endow a lot of foundations to do a lot of genuinely important research. Some not so important, but private businesses do that too. And so I think, yeah, that's awesome. Okay,
Shrimp treadmill.
okay.
Please elaborate.
It was a. We'll talk out. I'll send you. There was just Google shrimp treadmill.
I will definitely
yes.
Google shrimp treadmill.
If you haven't already, make sure you do. Okay.
I believe that was government funded. It was
Yes.
more to it than that, but that was the headline that came out. So
Yeah,
you have to look past the headline with this stuff always.
But still, the headline is awesome.
My apologies for interrupting.
Like when Russia launched, a bunch of geckos in a satellite to observe their mating behavior in zero gravity, and then lost control of the satellite. That's just a fantastic story. And without government funding of science, we would never have had that story. So I feel like there's really
what was the headline?
Of course.
The headline was Russian sex geckos in satellites lost control of it or something.
Oh, I've had one too many bourbons.
And I'm out of scotch too. But as far as the public funding, if I
more
can,
minutes for some additional questions. We actually have
okay,
quite
I
a
just
few.
want to finish my point on public funding of science.
Okay, fine.
I'll be real quick, I promise. So
Unlike
as far
me.
as the public funding of science goes, it's not a big deal. It's not propping up the edifice of science in the world. So if we got rid of it, we'd survive. But it's also not, if you're just doing it to cut the budget, you have bigger fish to fry. So
yeah, that's like a lot of other less important things, but also not benign things like I don't know PBS or some shit where technically no, don't fund that. But if you're prioritizing that, then clearly you have an agenda that's not cutting things.
Let's do the lightning round on questions.
That's true. So you guys down to take one or two more questions? Is that good?
How about we do a lightning round? I can do a question in 10 seconds or less.
I actually like your in-depth explanations. I think a lot of people are starving for dialogue on this level, so it's good.
I'm good at not shutting the fuck up,
yeah.
so. Just ask my mom. It's impossible.
Is from Michael Salomon. What is everyone's opinion on the young woman that was forced to receive chemo treatments? I believe we can actually look up the link and throw it up here, but I don't remember the specifics.
I've read enough.
I just read in passing that there was a young woman that was forced to receive chemo treatments. So yeah, what do you guys think about that?
The one who was forced to receive chemo? All right. I'll try to get this in quickly because I know we were planning on just doing an hour. Here's the thing. There's a thing about we have this thing called consent. It has to be informed. I don't think that anytime you were, I get it. She was still a minor. Her reason for not wanting to continue chemo was because it was unpleasant. And she said that she wanted to end her life then. A lot of people tried to compare her to Brittany Maynard, who chose to end her life. Brittany Maynard was terminal. This girl was not terminal. She just didn't want to go through chemo, which was unpleasant. A lot of things in life are unpleasant, honey. Chemo means you get to live. Get over it. Take the chemo and deal with it. I know that sounds cruel of me, but her whole reasoning was, I just wanted to not deal with the chemo. I know this sounds very unlibertarian of me, but her whole thing was the chemo made me miserable. smoke some pot and get over it. I say this as someone who lives in California. Trust me, it'll make the chemo a lot more pleasant. I'm fine with her being forced to deal with this, but I really think this was a case of uninformed consent. She didn't know what the risks were of not taking it. It's because if she was fine with dying at the age of, I'm guessing, 17, there's something severely wrong here. So.
Yeah, I mean, about this, I mean, a 17-year-old can choose to have an abortion in Connecticut without parents' consent, and so a lot of people were using that as evidence that she should be allowed to make her own medical decisions. And I feel like that's kind of a non sequitur. Yes, it shows that the age of consent is a gradual concept. It's not an event that happens when you're 18. We gradually give you more and more control over your own body, and we do have an emancipation process if you want to, get out of your parents' house because of abuse or something like that. But as far as medical treatment goes, she will probably live, another. I mean, Hodgkin's lymphoma is a very treatable, often curable illness. She will probably live another, 60 years, maybe 50 years, if she gets this chemotherapy. And, her mother supporting her decision to commit suicide in one of the most horrible ways possible, which is an untreated cancer spreading through her body and killing her. I mean, that kind of sounds like abuse to me. So, I mean, I do feel.
Or letting somebody jump off a bridge, but really slowly. I mean.
Yeah, letting someone jump off of a bridge into a bunch of sharp, pointy rocks, and then leaving her there for like a year.
Yeah.
I mean,
10 years from now, she'll be thanking those evil doctors who strapped her to the bed.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's
I really want to be like, fuck the state here, but we have an age of consent, and we also have a process. We also have a process of determining when you actually have the capacity to make an adult decision about your medical process, and that process determined that she was not competent to make these decisions for herself at this point. And so, I really want to be fuck the state on this issue, but on the other hand, she's gonna live. It's not gonna be as terrible as she thinks it is.
She just thought chemo sucks.
I just can't do it. I just can't do it. I would like to. You gotta believe that I would really like to, but I can't. So
yeah, it's sometimes your ideology gets outweighed by the fact that you think, hey, maybe living isn't that bad.
Yeah, and if she had been a 6-year-old, would we still be having this conversation?
No, but I mean the whole point of having a age of consent is that
the girl up in Canada the little girl up in Canada that did die because her parents petitioned the state and she was allowed to not get chemo.
Yeah, I mean that makes you bad parents.
Yeah, but I mean, where did this girl get the idea that chemo was poison? I mean,
her parents.
The fact that her mother was supporting her decision to commit suicide, that's really difficult.
Was she pursuing ridiculous naturopath remedies and not chemo? Do we know anything about that? Was it that kind of a case?
The girl in Canada, I believe,
one in Canada was in a native tribe and wanted to use their natural remedies and was seeking out a healer. And I mean, we all knew she was going to die. I mean, the treatment for her cancer was chemo. Like it was chemo. That's what you seek out. It's, what your doctor tells you, not the treatment of a naturopath. And what they blamed her death on was that she'd had one chemo treatment several months before, and that caused her to have a stroke 2 months later, not the fact that she had cancer and that she'd stopped treatment. So
this is one of those things that there's no satisfying answer, I think, because it's like I had a really endless debate about child rights with some libertarians on the internet a while back, and there's really no satisfying way to resolve this and feel
that is a deep rabbit hole, my friend. I will pass.
It is. But I guess the thing is, like, I've always said that if I saw, technically, on paper, like, you have the right to commit suicide. But if I saw you on a bridge, I might, tackle you
Yeah.
because in the
You're a
hopes,
good
being
person.
a hypocrite in the moment, in the hopes that someday you'd be happy that had happened.
Yeah. And I feel
Which
like
is,
I'm actually in the reverse position, which is that if I had been, a judge or a juror in her case, I think I would have been like, all right, you're 17, the risks have been explained to you. Good luck with your life or what's left of it. Because, uh, you know, I don't want the state to be involved in these kinds of medical decisions. But thinking about it
right.
as like if this was my child or, my niece or something, and I mean, just
You
thinking
put the
about it
needle in her arm
in a different
yourself for the
context makes it,
chemo.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be like, you want to live. I want to see you dance at your wedding.
Yeah, and as far as the abortion thing goes, all right, I don't think anyone here really believes that a 32 cell blastocyst is morally identical to a 17-year-old adult or close to an adult person. So
Correct, but
That's
this is
totally
not the
not.
abortion
Totally
show.
a
How
separate
about
issue.
that?
this is totally inappropriate, but
Such
I'm
a
just saying
stupid.
I think it's a complete non sequitur because people are bringing it up
Yeah,
as
I
though
think.
like she's 17 years old, she's qualified to decide when to take a life or something. Like what? That's not what
Yeah,
we're talking about.
I'm with Dan. I think that's not relevant enough to talk about in relation to this at all.
Yeah, I'm
Let's
still trying to
not
open
get
this
into the abortion
wine.
issue tonight.
God bless my brother-in-law with a giant bullet wine opener. I'm like, wow, Texas style over here. I don't even know how to work this. Good Lord.
Oh,
Anyway,
I
I'm gonna have to set it aside. I'm like, oh, too bad. I kind of want another one, but there's a bullet wine opener, so sad for me as a gun nut. I can't even figure this out. Anyway, I think
it's been
Do
a
we have more
fun
questions?
night.
Do we have any
set
questions
our
that would
time
restore my
as
libertarian street cred, more specifically?
yeah,
That was long.
actually.
Yeah.
As soon as you became skeptic, it was over. I'm sorry,
Yep,
Jan.
you're
You're
done.
See,
You're done.
I
yeah.
see one asking about biohazard suits and when they spray fields. Can I answer that one?
Yeah, yeah. I was
So
curious
let's see,
about you
one
guys
person.
addressing the orphan drug question from Lena Bryce, but either one, I mean, yeah, we're not in a big hurry. It's up to you guys' time schedule here, since we've got people that are interested in chit chatting. We usually try to round it out at about an hour and then have an after party, but I think we're good. So,
All right,
because we
one
can
person's
edit these
asking.
files, so take as many questions as you want.
All right, why is it that those who spray the chemicals have to wear full biohazard suits? Because dose makes the poison, motherfucker. Bang. I should probably explain that a little better. So here's the thing. We like to take and make memes out of these on the internet. But here's the thing. When we first spray the fields with crops, I say we like I'm out there spraying them after I analyze them, which I am not. I'm out here throwing back alcohol with you lovely people. What we do, we spray them. I mean, they're very dilute by the time we spray them anyway. Um, they're like, I mean, we're not spraying 100% pure concentrations of fluorate or glyphosate or anything. I mean, it's really something, it's only like a fraction of a gram of pure glyphosate that gets sprayed on a whole acre. It's a very small, tiny little amount. But at the same time, you do not want an organophosphate or any of these on you because extended exposure, a large amount of these, it takes a long time to get out of your system. So you don't want it in your system at all in any amount. So you use it just to make sure you don't have extended exposure problems, a lot of it built up on you. You also don't want it on your skin. You don't want it breathed in because you don't know how long it can take to get out of your system. So even though there's not a large amount, you don't want it on you when it's in the concentration it is when it's sprayed on. Also, it's organophosphates and the other ones that are sprayed into the field don't take that long to break down in nature. We also manufacture them so that they break down into safe products. Once upon a time, and I also know that they always bring up 2,4-D, the Agent Orange chemical. Ooh, scary thing. But once upon a time, Agent Orange had 2,4-D, and I believe it was 2,4,5-D. Now, 2,4,5-D is the one that made people like look like Marshmallow Man. It was the one that made people like bleed from their eyes and all sorts of horrible side effects. But like now we just have 2,4-D. 2,4-D is pretty safe. I mean, that was one of the safer chemicals I worked with in the lab. We make sure that all these things we spray in the lab break down into really safe things. I mean, there's one product that we had, PCNB, breaks down over a really slow period of time, but one of the things it breaks down into is a dioxin. We have to make sure that it's manufactured in such a way that the dioxin level is less than 2 parts per billion. And it breaks down into that over a slow period of time, and it's only put into nature in a very tiny percentage. So we put these into nature in tiny percentages. We put them in the field into low amounts, and by the time that anybody steps into the field without a bodysuit, it's broken down. So that's why the bodysuit, and that's the amount that we're putting things in the field in. So I hope that answers everyone's question from someone who has handled 100% pure or 99 I think the borate was 99.7% pure. The ethoprop, the borate, the tribufos and the turbufos were all the ones that could kill me at 5 milligrams. I've handled and manufactured them all. So I promise you, I'm not telling you anything about this stuff that that will make you any more prone to dying from all of the pesticides. And I've handled liters of them on top of liters of them, and I'm still very muchly alive, just a little bit of a weirdo. Cheers. But I was like that before the pesticides.
That was the fluoride that made you that.
God damn it! Don't tell them.
I mean the chemtrails.
It was the autism and the GMOs.
Ah.
So
I see people in the chat are talking about the rat study suggesting that GMOs, or maybe it's Roundup.
They're bringing up Seralini.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Oh, son of a bitch. Do we have to get into Seralini, really?
We don't have to, but we could point out the fact that the rats that he was using were actually bred for the purpose of developing tumors.
Yes.
So even if you gave them...
Yes.
And the fact that they showed no dose effect whatsoever in the study, which is that the rats that were given Roundup directly in their water did not show a higher propensity to develop tumors than the rats who just ate corn that had been sprayed with it in the fields. So
I like it when you do my scientisty job for me. That makes my life so much easier. So
you're welcome. So that's what I'm here for.
Aw, cheers.
To regurgitate other people's
to you,
science.
Dan.
Thank you.
Aw, I owe you one of these when next we're in the same part of the universe.
Indeed.
So I could get you some good dog. Except I'll get you some good dog. So I'm still very proud of that.
You should be.
That was I call that free market at work, right?
Yeah, our civil society at least. Do we have any more questions?
How about we take one more? Because it's late. I have friends hanging out downstairs that are serving more of these.
Yeah, and I'm dry.
If you guys are amenable, let's take one more. So we have a really good question. There's actually two really good ones, so I'm just going to pick a random one here. So Lena Bryce asks, what about government funding of biochemical companies to create orphan drugs? Do you guys have opinions of that?
I didn't hear drugs? You. You cut out.
Orphan drugs? Sorry. Lena asks, damn it, I have 55% Wi-Fi right now. Son of a bitch. Lena asks, what about government funding biochemical companies to create orphan drugs? And I'll put that up on the air.
I'm afraid I don't know anything about that, so I'm just going to shut up.
Okay.
I know a little bit about orphan drugs, solely because I have an orphan disease. I'm not sure if I am behind government funding for it or not. Here's, I guess, an explanation for the audience. orphan drugs are drugs created for an orphan disease. Orphan disease is when you have a disease that a very tiny percentage of the population has, and it's called an orphan disease because so few people have it that it's been orphaned. In other words, it's been abandoned by mainstream medicine. They've just kind of forgotten about it. So I'm not
Is there an
sure.
example?
Well, I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a condition where all my joints don't want to stay in the socket. Do you guys want to see? No? Are you
Yes.
takers?
Kind of, yeah.
Yes.
All right, I won't
Yeah.
pop anything out. All right. Here. All right. You know, most people when they're stretching, their shoulders stop about here. Mine keep going. That's not normal. You can't really see that well in a sweatshirt, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's like
Yeah, I can
I
see
always
that.
I always thought that was normal, but that's one of my stupid human tricks. Like my hips both kind of sublux. I have two ribs that pop out. It's kind of Gumby syndrome. But if ever a pharmaceutical lab wants to find a medication that's going to be like, your joints are going to stay in the socket, that would be amazing. But I would lose my stupid human trick. That's also really convenient for some things. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna stop there. I really freak people out at yoga classes. That's what it's convenient for. I've been drinking.
Sure. Yeah.
But here's the thing, like, or like if a company's gonna try to start, I have to try to save myself with science now. If a company is going to like start to try to manufacture orphan drugs, it's hard to get funding for it because they're going to say, I found out, we accidentally made this thing in the lab that looks like it's going to help regrow collagen, for people with X, Y, and Z disorder. Oh, how is this going to help our profits? Well, it's not going to hit more than 0.002% of the population. Oh, so it's not going to help us. So I can see why government funding might be good for something like that because what incentive would would a company have to make something that's not going to help them that much? Boner pills going to make a lot of money. Not a lot of money in helping out someone like me who, we're not a big percentage of the population. Not a lot of money in a new lupus drug. Not a ton of money in a new cluster headache drug.
Never
Yeah.
lupus. That's why.
And
It's like,
I have to say that I also don't see a huge argument as long as government is funding the development of drugs. I don't see why it shouldn't. I mean, why it should also decide to neglect orphan diseases. But government and politics suffers from a lot of the same problems. Whereas if it's not popular, you're not going to have a gigantic pink ribbon campaign with lobbyists in Washington D.C. who can really force things through a dysfunctional Congress in order to get more funding for the disease. So I think a lot of these diseases are still going to end up being neglected, and that's a tragedy. But I think if a billionaire happens to have your disease, that's the best bet I think of actually getting it funded.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Find
no
me a
doubt.
billionaire with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I'm in for a fun weekend. Sorry.
Well, on my
You
conference
are
call with
welcome,
Dave,
audience at home.
when I talk to David and Charles Koch on my conference call tomorrow, I'll ask them.
I'm on top of it.
You shill.
So.
You shill. All the shilling all the time. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I think we'll have a brief after party if you guys want to join. I think Meg is primed to set up another quick link if you guys want to hang out, chat. Maybe we can bring people actually on camera to ask questions if people are interested. I don't know what time frame you guys have. I know it's a little bit late on the East Coast. Oh, wait, what?
Yeah, it's midnight over here. I'm gonna head downstairs. My dog has been hanging out with my friend downstairs, so I'm gonna see what horrible things my friends have been doing with my puppy.
Well, I mean, we can do something for you bad.
I've been ignoring my dog. He's being very pathetic right now. So.
My friends are both dog trainers, so my dog is probably like doing backflips by now.
Oh yeah.
So
awesome. Well, anybody who wants to can join a little bit onto the after party and chat about these issues a little more. We can actually get people on camera and you can chat. I've got about 30, maybe 45 minutes tops before, because I've got to get up at 5. But yeah, it's been a really, really great chat with everyone. Thank you guys so much for your time. Sorry for the preliminary tech issues that we had at the very beginning, but it was awesome. So everyone, thank you so much for joining Bourbon and Bitches. Glad to be back for 2015. You can check us out at bnb.liberty.me and also at bourbonandbitches.com. We have a Facebook page too, so you better like that shit if you're nasty. And we'll be back next week too. We've got 2 awesome guests that we're hoping to confirm, and it's going to be epic. So yeah, we've got pretty much everyone scheduled out until February and March. So we've got plenty of good stuff coming at you. But anyway, thank you guys so much for your awesome discussions. We really appreciate it. I know these were complicated and sometimes controversial issues, but it's pretty sweet that everyone joined in and had a great debate. And we look forward to inviting you guys both back next time. Cheers.
Thank you.
Night, guys.
Awesome. All right, everyone, have a good night.